The room smelled like cigarette smoke and stale coffee. Outside, Rome was alive with traffic and voices. But inside the dubbing studio, the air had gone still. Clint Eastwood stood near the back wall, arms crossed, watching a man he didn't know speak his lines in a language he didn't understand. The voice was smooth, confident, theatrical. It filled the space easily. Too easily. Sergio Leone sat in the front row, one hand on his chin, the other tapping ash into a glass tray. He didn't look at Clint. He hadn't looked at him much since they started this project. The film was called A Fistful of Dollars, and it was supposed to be a Western, but it didn't feel like any Western Clint had ever been part of. There were no heroes, no speeches, no moments where the good guy explained why he was good. Just heat, dust, and a man in a poncho who didn't say much. Clint had been hired because he was cheap. He knew that. Leone had wanted someone unknown, someone who wouldn't cost the production money it didn't have. Clint was a television actor from a show most Italians had never heard of. He wasn't a star. He wasn't even close. But he'd said yes because he needed the work, and because something about the script felt different. Lean. Stripped down. A story told in gestures, not words. But now, standing in that studio, listening to a stranger's voice replace his own, Clint felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something quieter. A sense that the thing he'd built, slowly, carefully, with his body and his silences, was being erased. Leone leaned back in his chair. He said something in Italian to the dubbing director, who nodded and scribbled notes. Then Leone stood, stretched, and finally turned toward Clint. His expression was unreadable. He gestured to the screen, then to the voice actor in the booth, and shrugged as if to say, "This is how we do it here." Clint didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at Leone and waited. The thing about Sergio Leone was that he didn't believe in American actors the way American actors believed in themselves. He'd grown up watching Italian cinema, where every performance was dubbed, where voices were added later, where the image mattered more than the sound. To him, Clint's voice, low, flat, almost disinterested, was a problem. It lacked drama, it lacked passion, it didn't perform. So Leone had made a decision. He'd hired Enrico Maria Salerno, one of Italy's most respected dubbing artists, to replace Clint's voice in the Italian release. Salerno's voice was rich, commanding, full of emotion. It was the voice of a hero, the voice of a man who explained himself. But that wasn't the character Clint had played. Clint had spent weeks on set doing the opposite. He'd stripped away every unnecessary word, every gesture that felt too big. He'd learned to let the camera do the work, to hold still when other actors would move, to say nothing when other actors would fill the silence. He'd watched Leone frame shots with obsessive precision, building tension not through dialogue but through waiting, through watching, through the space between action and reaction. And now, that space was being filled. Clint didn't argue in the studio that day. He thanked the dubbing team, shook hands, and left. But something had shifted. He could feel it. The film wasn't his anymore. Not in Italy. Not in the version Leone seemed to want. But Clint also knew something Leone didn't. The film wasn't finished. Not really. It still had to play. It still had to find an audience. And audiences didn't care about what a director intended. They cared about what they felt. When A Fistful of Dollars opened in Italy, it was a hit. Not a massive one, but enough to matter. Audiences responded to the violence, the style, the way Leone shot the West like it was another planet. But the real surprise came later when the film was released in other countries. In Germany, in France, in Spain, and eventually in America. In those markets, Clint's voice stayed. His actual voice. The one Leone had thought wasn't good enough. And people loved it. They loved the flatness, the restraint, the way he could say more with a glance than most actors could with a monologue. They loved that he didn't explain himself, didn't justify, didn't perform emotion he didn't feel. He just was. Dangerous, unknowable, present. Critics started calling it minimalist. Audiences called it cool. But what they were really responding to was something deeper. They were responding to a character who didn't need to be liked, who didn't need to win you over, who existed on his own terms, and let you come to him, or not. It was a kind of power that didn't announce itself. And in a decade obsessed with rebellion and counterculture and rejecting authority, that silence became iconic. But Clint didn't know that yet. Not in Rome. Not in that studio. All he knew was that something he'd built had been taken from him, and he couldn't stop it. What he could do, though, was learn from it. Months later, Clint was back in Spain, shooting the sequel. For a few dollars more, Leone had brought him back. The first film had made enough money to justify a second, and this time, Leone had a bigger budget, better locations, more control. He still dubbed the film in Italian. He still replaced Clint's voice with Salerno's. But something had changed in the way he directed Clint. He gave him less dialogue, longer silences, more close-ups where nothing happened except the slow burn of a decision being made. Leone was starting to understand what Clint had understood from the beginning. The character didn't need to talk. He needed to be there. And Clint leaned into it. He cut his own lines. He asked Leone to remove explanations, to take out moments where the character justified his actions. He played entire scenes with his eyes, with the smallest shift in posture, with the absence of reaction. On set one afternoon, there was a moment that almost no one noticed. A scene where Clint's character was supposed to respond to an insult. The script had him saying something sharp, something that put the other man in his place. But when they rehearsed it, Clint just stared. He didn't say the line. He didn't move. He just let the moment hang there, heavy and uncomfortable. Leone watched from behind the camera. He didn't call cut. He let it run. And when the other actor finally looked away, unable to hold the silence, Leone smiled. He turned to his cinematographer and said something in Italian. The cinematographer nodded. They shot it again. Same silence. Same stare. Same refusal to fill the space. That night, in the editing room, Leone kept the silence. He cut the line entirely. And when the film was released, audiences felt the weight of that moment without understanding why. They just knew something had happened. Something had shifted. The character had won, without saying a word. It became one of the most remembered scenes in the film, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Clint never confronted Leone about the dubbing. He never demanded his voice be used. He never fought to reclaim the thing that had been taken from him. Because he understood something that most actors didn't. The performance wasn't about ownership. It was about effect. And if the effect worked, if audiences connected, if the character lived beyond the screen, then it didn't matter whose voice they heard in Italy. What mattered was what they felt. By the time The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly came out, Clint's silence had become a signature. It wasn't just a choice anymore. It was a brand. Directors wanted him because he didn't need dialogue to carry a scene. Audiences wanted him because he didn't explain himself. He was a mystery they could project onto. A blank screen that reflected whatever they needed to see. And in Hollywood, where actors fought for more lines, more screen time, more chances to show what they could do, Clint did the opposite. He took less. He said less. He became more. He carried that philosophy into everything he did. When he directed his first film, he cut entire monologues. He let actors sit in silence. He trusted the audience to feel what didn't need to be said. When he acted in films like Unforgiven and Gran Torino, he played men who'd lived entire lives in the space between words. Men who carried grief, rage, regret, and never once explained it. And audiences stayed with him. For decades. Not because he gave them answers, but because he gave them room. But none of that started with confidence. It started in a dubbing studio in Rome, with a director who didn't believe in his voice, and an actor who had to decide whether to fight or adapt. Clint chose adaptation, not submission, not surrender, but a kind of quiet transformation. He took what had been rejected, his flatness, his restraint, his refusal to perform, and turned it into the thing people remembered. He didn't do it loudly. He didn't do it with speeches or confrontations or grand declarations. He did it the only way he knew how, with silence. And in that silence, something grew. Something that didn't need to be named or explained. Something that audiences felt in their chest without knowing why. Years later, in an interview, someone asked Clint about Leone, about the dubbing, about what it felt like to have his voice replaced. Clint shrugged. He said it didn't bother him, that it was just part of the process, that he understood why Leone did it. But there was a pause before he answered. A small one, the kind most people wouldn't notice, the kind that said everything he didn't. Because the truth wasn't that it didn't bother him. The truth was that it had bothered him deeply. But he'd learned something from it. He'd learned that you don't prove yourself by being louder. You prove yourself by being more present, more controlled, more willing to let the moment speak for itself. Leone had tried to replace him, and in doing so, he'd taught Clint the most important lesson of his career. That the things people try to take from you are often the things that make you. That restraint isn't weakness. It's power held in reserve. That silence, when used right, is the loudest thing in the room. Clint never worked with Leone again after the trilogy. Their partnership ended the way it began, quietly, without drama, without explanation. But the influence stayed. It shaped every role Clint took, every film he directed, every moment he chose not to fill. And somewhere in all of that, a strange thing happened. The voice that wasn't good enough became the voice everyone wanted to hear. The performance that was too small became the one that filled the biggest screens. The actor who was hired because he was cheap became one of the most expensive, most respected, most enduring figures in cinema history. Not because he fought for it, but because he let the work do the fighting. And when people ask what made Clint Eastwood iconic, they point to the poncho, the cigar, the squint. They talk about the westerns, the cop films, the Oscar wins. But the real answer is simpler. He understood that you don't need to be heard to be remembered. You just need to be impossible to forget. And sometimes, the best way to do that is to say nothing at all.